How you doing? Yeah, good, you? Right, so we think we've got too much forage on now. The irony. Okay, I'll come have a look and yeah, go for a walk and let you know. All right, cheers. Bye bye. Who'd have thought it? How are you? Welcome back. The big coat's on, it's freezing cold and it's wet. But as I said to you over the summer, it's going to be a long time before I start complaining about the rain. So today we're going to look at the catch crops that have been established this year. There's three main reasons why they've been established this time. First would be SFI within England. We know that there's those options available to growers now for those overwintered covers. Secondly would be actually just the opportunity. Very early maize harvest for a lot of growers meant that they could get something established over the winter for all the environmental benefits to then be grazed over the winter. But then the third one is actually the significant need for a lot of this forage that's been produced over the winter following such a dry summer that we had through large parts of the UK. And what are the talking points about these catch crops that have been produced over the winter? It's ironically the fact that in some cases they're possibly looking a little bit too fit. We have had in many situations that open-ended autumn, it's bought us that extra bit of time that's been able to produce forage later on into the season that we all desperately needed in many cases. But what do you do with them now? Now, if it is that you have established these for the purposes of SFI in England, of course you can only graze them. You can't actually technically harvest them within the rules and regulations of SFI at the end of April, beginning of May. Now, I'm not going to be that guy who says keep sheep off over the winter, make sure you've got plenty of forage for the new year. We know that overwintered sheep and other aspects of the livestock system in the UK have this symbiotic relationship. They rely on each other. I rely on it myself. As I've said to you in my opening video, we have pedigree sheep at home, so I rely on winter grazing. But actually, the questions are, do we graze it or do we not graze it? So let's take a look at the reasons why. The main reason that we have sheep in over the winter, well, there's actually two reasons. One, there's an income. You gain that income from grazing over the winter on a per headage, per weekly basis. But also there is a management tool. The sheep come in over the winter and graze back some of those more forward grass mixtures maybe, or possibly some catch crops such as this. But what's the important part? What's the important reason of actually having these crops grazed to go into the new year? Well, it is that management strategy, as I say, to avoid winter kill. Winter kill sounds quite drastic, doesn't it? As though if we didn't do it, potentially all our crops would die because of the winter. That isn't necessarily the case. It's all to do with the environment that is created by possibly these crops that are a little bit too further forward, heading into the winter and creating overall losses heading into the new year. By having too much cover going into the winter, we risk a very heavy cover of overall forage through those winter months. Yes, it can be damaged by frost, it can be damaged by snow, but it creates an environment of decay. If it is that you do have some losses within that crop, in amongst all that heavy cover, it creates the perfect breeding ground for the likes of bacteria and disease to break down that crop. Going into the new year with plenty of fresh grass and a lot less cover around you can be massively beneficial, especially for those first cuts and first grazings into the new year. But why is it a hot topic of conversation this year? It's because this drought is on everybody's minds, quite rightfully. Everyone knows how dry it was last year and how soon that drought came. Therefore, they're questioning whether or not grazing crops such as this over the winter ahead of spring will put them on the back foot. Everyone's nervous about potential shortages of forage, but I think there's a happy balance to be had. But the first part is all about assessing the swards or the forage crops that you have as to whether or not they need grazing or whether or not they're best left to maximise the potential forage yield you have going into next year. Now, I appreciate walking our forages over the winter months isn't one of those things we would always routinely think about doing, but it is vitally important to assess our crops as to A, whether or not they might need to be grazed, or B, you want them to be grazed. There is two different reasons. But for me, general rule of thumb, covers at around about ankle height are perfectly fine to get through the winter and head into the spring on the right foot. It's those covers that are possibly slightly above our ankle height, and even more so in some cases. These are the ones that need that regular assessment. Are they going too far? Are we starting to see more winter kill and losses in there? Some of these further forward crops can still maintain performance all the way through the winter, depending on the weather that we get. Actually, in many cases, in between adverse periods of weather, those stiff easterly breezes that dry ground out very, very quickly can benefit in terms of keeping these forage crops fresher for longer by keeping them on their feet. So what are the two biggies that have been established in between particular our maize crops this year? Well, of course, it's that forage rye, but also Italians such as I'm in today. This was actually designed as a mixture option for the grower who wanted that little bit more flex, whether or not we are going to go back into maize this ground again. You've actually seen this ground on previous videos of mine. These were the crops that were rolled when they were first established in maize to try and retain that moisture. So here we have a crop of Italians, but we have just spiced things up a little bit. We've still maintained that little bit of a focus on the likes of fixing nitrogen and adding protein where we go by including the vetches in there as well. A lot of growers from the back of the videos that I've been doing I've been looking at the alternatives, but then driven by the overall requirement from the drought this year. So overall, these types of crops have been very popular, but there's still a fair few questions around how to manage them now going into the new year. Where I am today would be one of those farms that routinely would have store lambs brought over the winter. They've not actually been that easy bought this year, so they've been quite hard to come by. But actually the decisions have been made that off the back of last year, the drought and the shortage of forage, that we're going to try and maximise as much forage early doors as we possibly can. Why is that something to consider? Who knows what the next 12 months is going to give us. If we can bank on getting as much forage early doors as we possibly can, it then relieves the pressure and the safeguard throughout the rest of the year. Now in a year such as this, another thing to bear in mind is from both sides, if it is that you're thinking of getting sheep on to tidy some of these crops up, or if you are a shepherd who is utilising crops such as this, don't overgraze them too hard. Don't take them back too hard so that these crops really struggle to get going and put them on the back foot. As I say, it's a symbiotic relationship that we all have working with each other with regards to that winter grazing, but also management as well. It's vitally important to obviously sustain that relationship, keep everything on an even keel, that these crops are grazed correctly, not taken too far, but at the same time for you as a grower to ensure that your crops aren't grazed too hard so that they're on the right foot heading into the spring. Now, as I say, many growers have reached out and said, look, we've established these overwintered catch crops for the first time potentially for all the right reasons as discussed in previous videos. What do I do with them now? Well, like I say, it is a bit of horses for courses depending on how your crops have established and how far forward they are. Many situations, some have taken a bit of a balanced approach, probably done a bit of 50-50, left some but also grazed some, just to bounce off each other and counteract any potential shortcomings in the new year. But also though, in amongst all that, I've seen quite a few that have just been grazed. The reason because we've always grazed and we've always had sheep on over the winter. But again, I think we need to bear in mind the potential for any climatic concerns that impact our overall forage yields in any given year. We need to think about safeguarding as much as we can and front loading as much of our forage as we can as possible. This is actually the farm where you saw in some of those early videos where I was looking at those vetches. There was the appetite to actually look at straight vetch over the winter to give us a really high protein, nitrogen fixing crop. But that's all well and good when it is that you've got options around you, when you don't have the limitations of forage that we were presented with last year. you have a little bit more buffer in the system to play around a little bit maybe. So our halfway house was established, and both in the Italians and also the Forage Rye, we still managed to establish the vetch within these. So let's take a little bit of a closer look to see if A, they've established, and B, if I can find them. So here they are. They have taken some finding, but it's not because they're not there, but it is just because we've got a significant amount of cover of grass. But here they are actually established. They're hunkered down into the base. Like I say, they're the sort of thing that they're hard to find, but once you get your eye in, you can start to come across them. And what's the reason for establishing these vetches? Well, like I say, it's to look at that different diversity. Within SFI, if it is you're establishing the likes of grass and something like a vetch, or a rye or something like a vetch to graze over the winter and meet the SFI requirements, it ticks both of those boxes. But also, from a forage point of view in general, especially if it is that you're looking to cut these mixtures, they are fixing that nitrogen over the winter. They are going to be adding that extra level of protein into forages that are produced towards the end of April, beginning of May. So it will be really interesting to see how they get on. Like I say, I know they don't look like much at the moment, but we know that actually from our previous videos from last spring in the rye in particular, once they get a hold and once they get going in the spring, they can actually be really quite monstrous. So it'll be interesting to follow this through and see what they add to the crop. So there we have it. Just something for you to think about with regards to these catch crops that have been established for all those right reasons over the winter. If it is that you're thinking, oh, do we graze them? Do we get them tidied up? We'll never know. What we do know is just how quickly things can change. Yes, we've had some significant rainfall at the moment in some regions, but last winter was the wettest winter on record. And just look how quickly things changed. If it is that we can front load, as I say, as much forage into April and May as we possibly can, it will hugely reduce the overall pressure and forage throughout the rest of the year. And just one last point from me, just to say thank you for all the support that I've had, all the kind comments, whether it be via messages or in person if you've seen me, with regards to the videos that I'm putting together. I can promise you now, I massively underestimated the time commitment at certain periods of the year as well, as to what it takes to put these videos together. I think I was a bit ambitious, hoping to try and get a video out at least once a week, but look, we'll try and get as much content pulled together as we possibly can in this next 12 months. And as ever, please do put down in the comments as to what it is that you may like to see. I have taken a bit of time over the last few weeks just to recharge and refresh. Interestingly, quite a lot of people always think, well, quite quiet for you guys over the winter, especially around forage. And you would think it would be, but actually everything has to be planned, everything has to be pulled together, especially for the likes of spring established forage and the portfolios that are associated with those. At one point leading up to Christmas, the 7 weeks leading up to Christmas, I'd done 7,000 miles in 7 weeks. Whether that be conversations with growers, suppliers and breeders, but of course updating our teams with regards to what our offering is going to be, both technically and commercially for you UK growers. So as I say, we're back on track, and if you haven't noticed, in the meantime, I've also bought a drone. So look, as ever, if you've enjoyed, please like, share, subscribe, click that little bell, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye for now.